Alright, so our video back at if statements or branching, we saw that we can nest or put an if statement inside of an if statement. Well, you can do the same thing with loops, and it's called nested loops. So here in my VS Code editor, I have two for loops, one nested inside the other one. So that means for every iteration, or iteration means time through the loop, of the outside loop, the inner loop will run to completion. Now this may seem a little confusing at first, but if we use some breakpoints, we can help our brains get the logic of this a little bit better. Now if you don't know what breakpoints are and this debugging is, you can check out my previous video on loops and I show you how to use it there. So I'm going to put a breakpoint in at line 2 and another one at line 3, and I'm going to start debugging. It'll stop at my first breakpoint and we're going to have first loop print out. So now we're going to go down to the second loop. If I hit step into, it's going to print inner loop. Now it goes back up to the beginning of the second loop, prints inner loop again, goes back up to the second loop till completion. And then after it's completed, it'll jump back up to start the second iteration of the first loop. So this inner loop should print out a total of 9 times. And an easy way to figure that out is just take the two ranges times each other. So 3 times 3 equals 9. And so I'm just going to remove these breakpoints and run it to completion by hitting continue. And you see that we got 3, 6, and a total of 9 inner loops printed out. Now to help this be even easier to visualize, I have a commented out print here, and I'm going to uncomment that out, and now it'll just format it a little nicer for us to be able to read it. And I'm just going to run it regular this time. And now after each block, so each iteration, it prints out just a blank line so that we can easier see each iteration of the loop. All right, so I'm going to move on to my next example. Here we have 3 deep nested loops. Now this is getting really confusing because for each outer iteration, this second loop would finish to completion. And for each second loop, this third loop will finish to completion. So I'm printing out first loop, inner loop, and inner loop to help us see it. And once again, I'm printing out a print just to help us see things a little bit better. First of all, let's put in a breakpoint. Actually, let's put in 2 and start the program. So here it stopped at our second loop, so it's already printed out first loop down here in our output. I'm just going to hit step into, it's going to print inner loop, it's going to go straight down to the third loop, print inner loop, jump back up to the second loop. Notice I'm only iterating 2 times because I have range of 2. The range function just gives us a sequence of whatever number we put in there. Now this is the second iteration of the second loop. And it's going to go through and run the last loop to completion. And now since it went through twice of the second loop, it's going to jump back out for the second iteration of our first loop. Now we jumped into our second iteration of our outer loop, and now we're going to go through the second loop to completion, which means for every time the second loop goes to completion, the third loop will go to completion. So the third loop will print out, jump back up to the second. The third loop will print out all 3, jump back up to the second's done, so it'll jump out for the end of the program. So our inner loop should have executed 8 times because 2 times 2 times 2 equals 8. Now let's go on to the third example. Here I'm taking in user input to decide how many times to run each loop. So instead of having range hard-coded in, I'm putting a variable in its place. We're really starting to be able to do some pretty powerful things with our code here. So lines 4 to 8 are pretty much copy and pasted from our first example, except for the fact that instead of hard-coding in range, we're taking in input from the user. Remember, to do that, we use the built-in input function. So I'm going to run this. It's going to ask how many times should we run the first loop. I'll just say 2 times. How many times should we run the second loop? I'll say 3 times. And you notice an exception was thrown, and I did this on purpose. It says string object cannot be interpreted as integer. Now remember, range takes an integer to give us a sequence from 0 to whatever that integer is. And here, our num loop1 variable that the user is inputting is actually giving us a string, because by default input gives a string. So we have to either convert the type right when we ask for it, or we have to convert it down here in range. I converted the num loop2 right with the input, but I'll just show you how the other way would look, and I'll convert it down here inside the range function by using the int function to convert it to an integer. And make sure you get the correct number of parentheses there since you have two functions. Now let's run it again. So how many times do we want the first? We'll do it 2 times, and the inner we'll do 3 times. So the first ran twice, and the inner ran 3 times. So it looks like it did what we wanted it to do. And now you can run this as many times as you want and enter whatever input you want and get some pretty cool dynamic results. So here let's do 10, and let's do 5. And you see we get a lot of output spit out to the console. All right, so that was a basic introduction to nested loops. I have a little challenge for you here on my challenge.py file. So your challenge is going to be to make 10 times tables to 10 for the numbers 1 through 10. And so that'll look something like 1 times 1 equals 1, 2 times 1 equals 2, and so on to 10. So the last one would be 10 times 1 equals 10. And then for your second times table, the last one would be 10 times 2 equals 20, and the third times table would be 10 times 3 equals 30, all the way up to 10 numbers. So the last one should be 10 times 10 equals 100. You can pause the video, and then once you're done with that, you can come back and I'll show you what it should look like. All right, here's the example that I used for mine. You could have maybe done this a different way, but this is a way I found it pretty easy. So I'm just going to run this code so you see how it looks. And you see we got a bunch of output in the console down here with the final table of 10 being 10 times 10 equals 100. So that looks right. Let's scroll back up to the top and see if we start at 1 times 1 and go up to 10 times 1. Sure enough, we do. So it looks like this worked. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this informative. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. Another way to support the channel is if you have the means, I have a Patreon page. Leave a comment down below if something was too confusing or you have a question about something. And hope to see you all in another Decode Tech video.